my very first question to you is, what were some of the key milestones or learnings in your professional journey that you would like to share with us, and how has IIFM been instrumental in shaping your career?
Sure. So Shivani, in the past 18 years of my work in the sector, one of the things that I've learned is how important it is to have empathy when you're working in projects or programs that that involve you working with the community. And I think that level of empathy really first start originating when I was at IFM, in terms of being able to understand what are the specific nuances that you need to have when you're working with communities. It was really my first insight into understanding how community-based projects work, how how you sort of get trained for the development sector overall. And for me, I think that's really something that's been the biggest contribution that IFM has brought in my own professional journey. I think your second question was around the milestones, right?
Yeah, like what were the learnings that you have in your professional journey where
Sure.
IFM has been instrumental?
Right, and I'll highlight a couple of them. I think the first was one, to be able to use the technical knowledge that IFM imparts, and I believe the course has changed quite significantly now, but at least at the time, I'm from the class of 2002. At the time we were doing it was a very interesting mix of management techniques in the development context. So you looked at it with the lens of environment, or with the lens of natural resources, or community conflicts and resolutions. So I think a lot of technical knowledge that happened at IFM was something that I could find easily applicable to real life situations and work that I subsequently did in CARE, in IntelliCap, and at the British Asian Trust. And I think the other bit is really, as I mentioned earlier, is about being able to understand how different stakeholders work with each other. How do you actually manage these stakeholder relationships? Could be it funders, or be it the program beneficiaries or clients that you work with, and that sort of initial understanding came from IFM. The fact that we had a couple of summer internships really helped in having more real life situation to be able to apply our learning to, even while I was a student.
Okay. Means theories that are taught us in the college is really important to apply it in the practical life.
It is, yes. I mean, it might sound not that important when you're sitting in a classroom and there are always more interesting things happening outside it. But honestly, I think you can find that a lot of what you study, it as boring as it may sound in the classroom, it does become quite interesting when you apply it in a real life situation. To date, and I don't think I can say with a lot of confidence that why forestry was my most interesting sort of subjects. I kind of struggled through that. But the development aspects, or especially the ones where it involved about programs where you could work with at the community level, those were definitely something where I could see a direct applicability of what we learned in campus to what we subsequently did. Obviously, you need updates and you still need to continue to upgrade your knowledge. But yes, there is a correlation.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We'll see that we are focused in our studies.
And yeah, please don't forget to have fun. I think that's important too, though.
Yes, sure, ma'am. So, ma'am, that you told that you were involved with the stakeholders and fundraising. So, as you have been working in the space of investments to promote MSMEs or local entrepreneurs, how do you see the public or private sector collaboration towards social investment? And any other government initiatives such as Startup India contributing towards such investments?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's an evolving field, right? My own experience has largely been more, I would say, in general management, of being able to be part of institutions that are building up. Be it when I worked at CARE, it was largely in a team that focused on microfinance and livelihoods, and so we worked with stakeholders that involve local governments or stakeholders within the government, and help them achieve specific development outcomes of their programs. I mean, just as an example, one of the first projects I worked on was focused around building local entrepreneurs in Madhya Pradesh, in I think it was Hoshangabad district back then. And it was very focused on helping the public distribution system find this sort of cadre of local entrepreneurs who they could train as entrepreneurs and who they could equip with running small shops, kirana stores and small shops. Now, it could be a project as basic as that you're actually working with the government to ensure, or a part of the government to ensure, that what they are trying to achieve becomes easier, because a non-profit like ours could actually help with them side by side and give training inputs or provide funding if required. To later on, where I have worked at IntelliCap. One of the key things that I worked was a program called Sankalp Forum, where we built a large platform for impact investors and entrepreneurs. And there again, it was more overviewish. So we were looking at how do you create an environment or an ecosystem that enables entrepreneurs to find access to capital, knowledge, and networks. And there again, it's really important not just to have investors on the table or around the table, but you also need other stakeholders to come in. So programs like Startup India become instrumental because startup no longer is just the endeavor of an entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs, right? The moment Sarkar comes in or government comes in with a program like that, there is a more positive climate in the overall sort of industry and the country to be open to what the startups need. And I think that's really what's really helpful. Programs like these too. Suddenly the access to institutions, to new knowledge, and to establish networks becomes so much more easier for entrepreneurs to access. And so that's one of the learnings I've had through the years, that it's quite, you can create these micro environment or micro sort of cosm of entrepreneurs and investors, but it's not going to go a long way unless you find a way to plug into large programs which are backed by the government, or be involved in larger networks and policy sort of frameworks where you can see how you could extract benefit from those for the entrepreneurs or the investors that we might be serving in a private sector capacity. And the interplay of private sector and public sector is equally important. That said, not all of us can do all of it, right? So we have to sort of recognize our own role or the role of our own institutions in saying what is the part that we can do very well. It could be as simple as maybe, for some of us, we're still writing white papers, which are just recommendations in short, or you could really be involved in building programs where different stakeholders, private and public, are involved in different capacities, funding and non-funding as well.
Like, what would be the aftermath of COVID-19 towards such investments? Like, they are determined to create an impact in society as well as in economy. But what will the impact of COVID-19? Like, only philanthropies and charity cannot sustain the economy for long. Yes. So how do you see the investments after COVID-19?
So it's a very loaded question, Shivani, and I don't think I would be able to answer all the nuances of this, but I'll attempt what I understand of it. I think you're right. Philanthropy and charity sector is not going to be able to do a whole lot. They are definitely important because they can bring in resources where it's difficult to find resources, right? What the government might have in terms of the relief funds or in terms of allocations might not really reach the last mile sometimes, or the poorest family. And that's where I think charity and philanthropy sector becomes important, because they can really fill the gap. But the total allocation is only going to be a fraction of what the government allocations can bring in, or the state schemes can sort of bring in. And I think that's why it's important to see how both could be harnessed. And there is a very key role for large corporates or for people who work as intermediary between these two sets of folks, the NGO or the community-based organization segment, as well as the state government, national government sort of segment, how they play a role and how they can ensure that there is, enough resources are being harnessed to be able to be deployed across the spectrum. Now, what happens to the investments? It's a very tricky question. It's not, each enterprise and each entrepreneur, I think, navigates it's in their own way. Some enterprises have and when I say enterprises, both, I would say both for-profit enterprises as well as the non-profit entrepreneurs organizations, I think have a way with a very sort of progressive leadership. We've seen that they've been able to navigate COVID much better because they have really focused on creating their sort of funds. When I say funds, a pool of capital that could tide them through a time like this when suddenly their income or revenue sources are affected. On the other hand, we've also seen NGOs and enterprises that have been able to make the most of situations like COVID because they are in a segment such as healthcare or sanitation work or specific services, essential services, where they've been able to really boost their income and boost their revenues because they can service this sector, right? So I think it's a very contextual question. It would depend on how well people could do. How well an enterprise or organization can navigate this crisis. That said, it's always good to sort of diversify their revenue source and their income sources so that they are not dependent on one particular type of stakeholder.
Okay. The context was that, ma'am, that many times private sector restrain themselves to invest because of the risk involved. Like there's no specific returns to them. So thereby, and after this crisis situation, they'll be more restraining themselves to invest in these programs further.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. So I think there is if you look at the funder if you look at funders placed across a spectrum or on a curve, you'll see that different funders have different kinds of risk appetites, risk return appetites, right? Some of them who are more commercial in that sense are looking for more commercial and market-based returns, and they are probably not the best fit for an organization that's either non-profit in its approach or is more around social welfare and impact alone. At the same time, there will be others, that's where philanthropists and charity organizations come in, which are more focused on complete sort of social welfare or impact, and they are okay with their allocations or monetary contributions being used for building institutions that will be very focused around specific vulnerable populations, for example. So I think I wouldn't go so far as to say that the private sector can't take enough risk, because the private sector investor also, a lot of them take a lot of risk. How much will COVID affect them, again, is very dependent on each enterprise or each business model that they might be assessing, right? They might continue to take a big risk for an enterprise or an investee company that seems to be able to offer disproportionate returns or almost market rate returns. So if I was an investor and I had an option to put it into a healthcare company at this point, let's say a medical devices company at this point, absolutely, it would probably get a good return, and it would be a company that might thrive in this situation. So I think so I wouldn't go so far as to say that the private sector doesn't have that kind of risk appetite. Yes, some of the investments will get affected. Some of the outlook on the kind of returns expected will get impacted, because clearly COVID is changing the way people did business, is changing the way consumer demand was generated. So yes, that will happen, but it's again very specific to specific instances, I feel.
Okay, thanks, Aprajita. And I'm sure such initiatives that are made towards upgrading livelihood and sustaining economy will yield irrespective of these tough times. Now, I would like to take you 18 years back into your IFM days. So, what are your favorite IFM memories that you cherish till date? Some of the memorable tidbits that you would like to share with us.
That's interesting question. So I think lots of memories, honestly. For me, IFM was in some sense, just a step into a new world. We were all we discovered our independence. We discovered, for me personally, I discovered both being very independent, away from home, but also at the same time, navigating. So we were already doing, for example, summer trainings, etc. So it was almost like stepping into the professional world, but still having the benefits of being a student. I think for me, being in the city of Bhopal was quite interesting, because it's a beautiful city. The campus is amazing. Now it's probably got much less greenery than what it used to have. But I think that was really one of the most awesome part of it. I made some great friends. Almost, I mean, we had a very small batch size back then. We were only 39 to a batch, so it was really like just having kind of a large family staying on campus, right? And most of the friendships have continued over these sort of 2 decades now, where we still meet and we still speak and go on holidays together with a lot of our friends back from IFM days. I think some of my favorite memories were going out and eating, parathas at the station at night. So, when you're craving good food, going out to, so a lot of them, I would say, outside the campus, where, the fact that we were on field a lot. I think of the 21 months that we were at IFM, for my batch, at least 9 months were outside campus, were on assignments in fields. So I personally saw a lot of India during that time. I saw a lot of, we were out in the nature a lot, working in different places, almost like a, holiday packed into the course. So that was some of my favorite parts. Yeah, I think those were the key ones, I would say, and I think the friendships have lasted so long, so that's obviously the cherry on the cake.
Yeah, sure, Aparajita. Like we'll all cherish this for so long, like for a lifetime. So my last question to you that would capture the interest of the entire audience. As an alumnus, what is your advice to freshers or those who are joining IIFM to get the best out of these 2 years? What's your message for them?
Yeah, I feel like, a lot of what I will tell you, or any of your other seniors will tell you, take it always with a pinch of salt, right? Each of us builds our own experiences and builds our own learnings on what we go through and what we think is right and wrong. That said, I think, like I said, don't forget to have fun. I think these are going to be 2 very good years of your life, and once you, a lot of you will step into the working world after this, and some of you might have come from jobs before, but you will step into a working world for a long time. So, definitely don't forget to make good use of these 2 years. That said, I think, don't just depend on the knowledge and resources that IFM provides you. Look at how it plugs you into a network of people, of institutions that can open up a very different world.